Business partnerships, sometimes they feel like a match made in heaven, right? One person has the brilliant idea and all the skills, and the other has the capital and the connections. It seems absolutely foolproof. But what happens when that amazing venture, built on nothing more than a handshake, starts to completely unravel? Let's dive into a real world case study and see just how quickly things can go sideways.
This is basically the golden rule of business. A clear, formal agreement is the foundation. It's what lets a company grow without just collapsing under the weight of misunderstandings. It sets out the roles, the contributions, and what everyone expects from day one.
Well, you get a situation exactly like this one. We're talking about a venture to build these really specialized roadside containers for the transport industry. It was a fantastic idea, two key players, but it was all built on trust instead of a contract. And as you're about to see, when things got complicated, that trust just vanished, and the whole thing was on the verge of sinking. So, at the very beginning, everything looked perfect. You had two partners, Steve and Lucas and Steve Cox, and their skills were just a perfect match. They jumped right in, built three of these containers, and even started bringing in revenue, all based on a simple, informal understanding.
And here you can really see that dynamic in action. On one side, you've got Steven Lucas, who we're calling the creator. He was the hands-on guy, he provided the labor, the designs, the intellectual property. He physically built the assets. And on the other side, Steve Cox, the catalyst. He was the fuel for the fire. He brought the money to finance the builds and the business contacts to actually make sales. It's a classic, really powerful combo.
But as the business started to grow, that lack of a formal agreement, that solid foundation we were just talking about, well, it started to show some serious cracks. Success made things more complex, and with that complexity came arguments that their simple handshake deal was just not equipped to handle. So, what exactly went wrong? It really came down to a few key things. First, there was no signed shareholder agreement. So, who owned what? Big question mark. There was no formal company structure. All the money Cox put in was basically treated like an undocumented loan, an IOU. Meanwhile, all the Lucas's hard work and his intellectual property had no agreed upon value. All this ambiguity, it was just a recipe for disaster, and it led to these huge fights over ownership and what fair compensation even meant. And this is where a third party, Sandoz Advisory, gets brought in by Stephen Lucas. Their job was to be a neutral mediator, to slice through all the confusion, look at the cold hard facts, and figure out a logical way forward. They basically had to untangle this massive financial and operational knot. And they were incredibly methodical about it. They got started in November 2025 and right away issued a crucial preliminary opinion on who owned what. By December, they'd put together a financial summary, putting actual dollar amounts to everyone's contributions. In January, the project finally hit a cash flow break-even point. And by February, a final resolution was worked out. This timeline really shows you how they took a step-by-step approach to bring some order back to the chaos.
This right here, this was the game-changing opinion from the mediator, and it all boils down to one thing. If you don't have a signed contract that says otherwise, the person who physically creates the assets, in this case Stephen Lucas, is presumed to be the legal owner. This one statement completely flipped the script and set the baseline for every negotiation that followed.
Now, to really get what the mediator was doing, you have to understand this concept: sweat equity. It's not cash, it's the value of the actual work you put in, the design, the late nights, the specialized skills. In this case, Stephen Lucas had poured a ton of sweat equity into this thing, but because there was no contract, it had never been formally valued or even really accounted for. Okay, let's look at the numbers, because this really lays out the financial reality of the situation. The total capital expenditure was nearly $150,000. After the company paid back Cox's loans from the revenue it made, the books showed it still owed over $53,000 directly to Lucas for his own costs. Think about that for a second. Even though the business was making money, Lucas, the guy actually building everything, was personally carrying all of the financial burden and risk. One of the biggest challenges here was that the bookkeeping was just a mess. So how did the mediator even begin to get a clear picture? Well, they used the Pareto principle. You might know it as the 80-20 rule. By focusing on just the 20% of transactions that made up 80% of the costs, they could build a really reliable financial summary without getting bogged down in every single missing receipt. It was a super pragmatic and smart way to handle it.
So, with a clear financial picture and a solid legal opinion on who owned what, the stage was finally set. The mediator can now forge a new, formal agreement and turn this chaotic partnership into a clean, functional business model. And here is how they fixed it. And wow, it was a pretty radical change. First, Stephen Lucas took 100% ownership, and along with it, all the company's debts and liabilities. Second, that old unsigned share offer to Cox, formally withdrawn. Third, Cox's role was totally redefined. He wasn't a partner anymore, he was a high-value sales supplier. And fourth, that new relationship was locked in with a 20% commission deal on all the sales he made. Simple, clean, no room for argument.
So to settle up for all the past work, a one-off payment was calculated. This number, almost $64,000, was the 20% commission that Steve Cox's company was owed for all the sales made up to the end of 2025. This payment wiped the slate clean and let both of them move forward under the new, much clearer terms.
Now, it is really important to see this from both sides. This solution wasn't a happy ending for everyone. This quote shows that Steve Cox was understandably very disappointed. From his point of view, he was the catalyst, he was instrumental to the whole project, and he felt that deserved a piece of the company. So even though the final agreement was legally and financially sound, it just didn't match up with his expectation of being a co-owner.
So, after going through this whole mess, from the handshake all the way to the resolution, what can we all learn from it? What are the big takeaways for anyone thinking about starting a business?
Okay, first and most important, formalize your partnership from day one. A handshake is a great start, but it is not a contract. Second, define and put a value on all the contributions, not just cash, but the labor, the skills, the IP. Third, establish crystal clear ownership of the assets right from the get-go. And finally, plan for disagreements. A good partnership agreement isn't just for when things are going great, it's for when they inevitably go wrong.
And really, this is what it all comes down to, isn't it? This image just perfectly captures the core tension of this entire story. You've got the idea, the creation, the sweat equity on one side of the scale, and on the other, you have the money that makes it all happen. Keeping those two things in balance, well, that's the ultimate challenge of any partnership.
Which leaves us with one last question to chew on. When a partnership succeeds because of both the creator and the catalyst, but then it falls apart, who truly gets to claim ownership of that success? The person who built it with their own hands, or the person who paid for it all? It's a question every entrepreneur should probably ask themselves before they ever shake hands on a deal.